In this video, I'll be showing you how to make this textured cardigan. I make it in a size extra small, but it's easily adjustable for size, and I show you how to do that in the video. For this project, I use 450 grams of medium weight yarn, a 6mm hook, a darning needle, some stitch markers, a pair of scissors, and some buttons. Okay, so to start, we're going to grab our yarn and make a slip knot. And pull it tight. Now we're going to make our foundation chain for the back panel. So if you're making an extra small, you'll do 54 chains, a small is 60 chains, a medium is 66 chains, a large is 72 chains, an extra large is 78 chains, a 2XL is 84 chains, and a 3XL is 90 chains. I will also include the centimeter and inch measurements in case you're using a different yarn or a different size hook and you want to be able to make it in a similar size. It is going to be a little bit baggy, a little bit oversized, so feel free to adjust the measurements slightly. But for an extra small, it's 44 centimeters or 17 inches. For a small, it's 49 centimeters or 19 inches. For a medium, it's 54 centimeters or 21 inches. For a large, it's 59 centimeters or 23 inches. An XL is 64 centimeters or 25 inches. A 2XL is 69 centimeters or 27 inches, and a 3XL is 74 centimeters or 29 inches. So go ahead and make the number of chains that you need to make. I'm making this in a size extra small, so I'm going to do 54 chains. So now I've done my chain up of 54, and you will have done however many chains you need to do for your size. So we're going to block off that last chain and we're going to chain up one more time. And now we're going to count these first two chains as our first stitch. So we're going to go into the third chain from the hook, but this is going to count as our first stitch, and we're going to do a double crochet into the third chain from the hook. So to do that, you're going to yarn over, insert into that third chain along, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through two, and yarn over, pull through two. So now we'll do that again into the next chain, yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through two, and yarn over, pull through two. So now you're just going to go ahead and do one double crochet into every chain going all the way down. So you'll have the same number of stitches that you have of chains, but the first two chains will count as your first stitch. So for double crochets, you'll just do one less than what you did for the chains. Okay, so I've just done my last double crochet into that last chain of the foundation row. So now we're going to have our rows of double crochets for every odd numbered row. So row number 1, 3, etc. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start our next row by chaining up 2. And this is also going to count as a stitch. So because this is counting as a stitch, we're not going to go into that first stitch. We're going to skip that one because it's already done, and we're going to go into the next stitch. And this row is going to be seed stitches. For the first stitch, we're going to do a double crochet. So into that first empty stitch, which is this one here, we're going to do a double crochet. And now to do the seed stitch, we need to yarn over, wrap around the post. So I'm coming across the front of it and underneath, grab the yarn on the other side and pull it through. And now I'm going to yarn over again, go back around the post, grab the yarn, pull it through. And now one more time, I'm going to yarn over, around the post, grab the yarn and pull it through. And now we're going to yarn over and pull through all of the loops on the hook except for one. So that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 loops. So pull through the first 6 loops, leaving one loop on the hook. And now we're going to yarn over and pull through those last 2 loops. So that's our first seed stitch. So now because we did the seed stitch around the post of that double crochet, we're going to skip the next stitch and go into the stitch after. So for the seed stitch, you're basically going to be skipping every second stitch because this counts as 2 stitches. We've got the double crochet and we've got the seed stitch. So we're going to skip that next one and yarn over and double crochet into the next stitch along. Yarn over, pull through. And now we're going to do our next seed stitch. So we need to yarn over, go around the post, yarn over, pull through, yarn over again, back around the post, yarn over, pull through, and one more time, yarn over, around the post, and pull back through. Now we're going to yarn over, pull through the first 6 loops on the hook, leaving 1 loop still on the hook. And now we're going to yarn over and pull through those last 2 loops. So now you can go ahead, going all the way down the rest of the row, skipping every second stitch and doing a double crochet and then seed stitch into every second stitch. So once you get to the end, join back in and I will show you what we're going to do next. Okay, so now I'm almost up to the end and I'm just doing my last seed stitch. And now we're going to do 1 double crochet into that last stitch in the row, into that chain row, because that counted as a stitch. If you're trying to work out if you've done the right amount of seed stitches, take 2 off the total number of chains that you did and then halve that, and that should be how many seed stitches you have. So I had 54 stitches in this first row. So I have 26 seed stitches, and then we've got our chains on this side and our double crochet on this side, which together will make it to 54. So now for the next row, I'm going to chain up 2, and that's going to count as our first stitch again. And now because we've done our first stitch, we don't need to go into that loop there. We're going to do 1 double crochet into every stitch going along. And you should be able to tell, but basically there is going to be a loop at the top of the double crochet and the seed stitch from the previous row. So you should have the same number of double crochets that you had for the first row. Because this is an odd numbered row, we're just going to be doing the double crochets going all the way down. So when you get to the end, join back in and I'll show you what to do for the next row. Okay, so now I'm just up to my last 2 stitches, doing my last double crochet into that last stitch and then my last double crochet into that chain row because that counted as a stitch. And now we're up to an even numbered stitch. So for every even numbered stitch, it's going to swap out between a seed stitch and a V stitch. So we're going to chain up 2 to start, and that's going to count as the first stitch. Now this time, instead of going into that first chain in the row, we're going to skip the first chain and go straight into the second chain with 2 double crochets. So this one here is our first stitch already, so we're skipping that next stitch, and into this one we're going to do 2 double crochets. 1 and 2. And now we're going to skip the next stitch and go into the second stitch along and do 2 double crochets. So that's what we're going to do for the rest of this row. So 2 double crochets into every second stitch. So skipping the next stitch, going into the one after, I'm going to do 2 more double crochets. So you can see here, it's going to make a sort of V looking shape. Oops. So you just need to go ahead and go all the way down to the end of the row, doing the V stitch, doing 2 double crochets into every second stitch. And when you get to the end, join back in and I'll show you how to finish off this row, and then we can get started on the next row. Okay, now I'm almost at the end of the 4th row, and you should have the same number of V stitches that you do for seed stitches. So the double crochets will always be the same, and the seed stitches and the V stitches will be the same for the back panel. For the front panel, it's a little bit different because we'll be doing decreases, but we will get to that. So I'm just doing my last V stitch. We're going to need to do our last double crochet into the chains of the previous row. So there's our last double crochet, and now we're going to chain up 2, and we're back to the double crochets. So not going into that stitch because the chains count. So going into every stitch once you've finished this double crochet row, you're going to get started on your seed stitch row. So basically you're going to do doubles, seeds, doubles, V's, doubles, seeds, doubles, V's until you get to the end. So this is going to be the pattern for the back panel. So now you're going to continue doing that pattern until you've done 23 rows. And I've zoomed out a bit so that you can see the whole panel at once, but this is the back panel with our 23 rows, and that's the same for all sizes. So the only reason you would do more rows in this section is if you wanted it to be longer. And as long as you do the same number of rows for the back panels and the 2 front panels, you can do however many rows you want to do. Okay, so now we're going to get started on the front panel. And to do that, I'm just going to create my slip knot. And then I'm going to do a chain. I'm going to do a chain up of 27, which is what you do for an extra small. So an extra small is 27 chains, a small is 30, a medium is 33, a large is 36, an extra large is 39, a 2XL is 42, and a 3XL is 45. So much like the back panel, we're going to do 1 extra chain than we're actually going to be doing stitches when we do our rows, but that's because our chain up 2 is going to count as a row just like it did for the back. So I'm going to go ahead and chain 27. Okay, so now I've done my 27 chains and I am going to now do a double crochet into that 3rd chain from the hook. So we've got our 1st chain, 2nd chain, and we're going to skip those and we're going to go into the 3rd chain from the hook because these first 2 chains are going to count as our 1st stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and do my double crochet just like we did for the back panel and go all the way down the rest of the row doing my double crochets. So just like the back panel, because we did 27 chains, we're going to be doing 25 double crochets into this section, or 2 less than however many chains you did, because these first 2 chains are going to count as a stitch. So I will have 26 stitches, but I only have to do 25 double crochets because these chains will count as a stitch. So just go ahead and continue doing double crochets until you get to the end. Okay, so I'm just doing my last double crochet, and now we are going to chain up 2, which is going to count as our 1st stitch. So skipping that 1st stitch because we've already got our stitch for that one, I'm going to do a double crochet, and then I'm going to do my 1st seed stitch around that post. So just like we did for the back panel, we're going to do a seed stitch. So now I'm going to skip that next stitch just like we did for the back panel. So skipping that next stitch, doing a double crochet into the one after, and then a seed stitch around that post. So the seed stitch is counting as its own stitch, which is why we are skipping one of the stitches in the previous row. So go ahead until you get to the end. Okay, so I'm just doing my last seed stitch. And now we're still skipping that next stitch because that's the stitch for the seed stitch. So I'm doing my last double crochet into the chain row of the previous row. So make sure you don't forget about that stitch. So now we're going to chain up 2, and we've got our 12 seed stitches. So you'll know you've done the right number if you take 2 off how many stitches you have from that first row. So for me, doing an extra small, that's 26 stitches. So you would take the number that you've used for this first row, and then you will minus 2 and you will halve that. So for me, I will be minusing 2 from 26, which will make it 24, and then divided by 2 is 12. So I know that I've done the right number of stitches. So now I'm going to go ahead and go back to doing my double crochets, skipping that first stitch because that's what the chains are for. So now I'm going to go back to doing my 25 double crochets, or you will do however many stitches you need to do for your size because these chains are counting as a stitch. I feel like I've said that a lot, and I'm very sorry if I am insulting your intelligence. I definitely don't mean to do that. I just know that I have been confused in the past when I have chains counting as stitches. I don't know why my brain just blocks them out, and I would hate to confuse anybody else. So apologies if the repetition is really annoying. I will stop from now on. I won't be talking about the chains anymore, but make sure you don't forget. Okay, so now we're at the end. I'm going to chain up 2 again. And now we're going to do our V stitch. So we've done that first stitch there. Skipping that next stitch, I'm going to do 2 double crochets into that 3rd stitch along. So now you can go ahead and do your V stitches all the way down, doing 2 double crochets into every 2nd stitch. And to make sure that you've done the right number of stitches, you'll just need to do the exact same number that you did for seed stitches. So I had 12 seed stitches, and I will need to have 12 V stitches. And you will need to have however many you did in that first row, and you're going to -2 and then divide it by 2. So go ahead and do as many stitches as you need to do, and you're going to keep doing this pattern. So you're going to keep doing the double crochets, seed stitch, double crochets, V stitch, just like we did for the back panel. So you're going to keep going, but this time you're going to stop when you get to row 12. So if I'm looking at this one, it's going to be here. So you're going to keep going until you get up to here. So you just need to do the exact same thing that we've been doing so far and the exact same thing that we did for the back panel, and stop when you get to row 12, because we're going to start doing some decreases, and I will show you what to do. Okay, so I have just finished my last stitch in row 12 of this front panel section. So I've just done my last V stitch here, and I'm going to chain up 2. And now what we're going to do is we're going to start decreasing so that we have our neckline. So what we've done up until this point, up until getting to row 12, is going to be identical for both sides of the front panel. But now we're going to do decreases on this side of the front panel, so going up this side. And when we do the other panel, we're going to do our decreases on this side. This is just to make sure that the stitches are facing the same way, because the double crochets look a little bit different on the back than they do on the front. So we want to make sure that both panels are going to look the same. If you finish one panel, you'll come back and you'll do all of this again, and then you'll join in at the timestamp that I leave for the top of the second panel, where we'll be doing the decrease on the other side. So for the decrease, which is going to be on this side, I'm going to do a decrease into the first 2 stitches of this row. So we've already got our first stitch there with the chains. So now I'm going to do a double crochet decrease. So I'm going to yarn over, insert my hook into that stitch, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, and now I'm going to yarn over again and go into the next stitch. So into that next stitch, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, oh, there's a hair, yarn over, pull through 2, and now yarn over, pull through all 3 loops on the hook. So that's our first decrease. So now you're just going to go along the rest of the row as usual, but you will have decreased this row by 1 stitch. So instead of doing 25 double crochets like I have been doing this whole time, I'll be doing 24, and if you were making a different size, you'll just do 1 less than the number that you did in the previous row, but this decrease is counting as a stitch. So if you're not counting the decrease, you're going to do 2 less. So go ahead and finish this row. When we get to the end, we're going to chain up 2 as normal, and we're going to start our seed stitch row. So once you get to the end of the seed stitch row, join back in, because we're always going to be doing the decreases on this side. So join back in when you get to the end of your decrease row, and I will show you what to do. Okay, so I am nearing the end of my seed stitch row, and you want to do as many seed stitches as you need until you've done 1 less than the previous time that you did the seed stitches. So for me, the last time I did seed stitches, I did 12, and now I've done 11. So I'm not going to do any more seed stitches, because you want to be reducing by 1 every time. So now we would normally skip this stitch because that's the seed stitch. So I'm going to keep skipping that stitch, and I'm going to go into the next stitch and do our double decrease like we did at the start of the previous row. So yarn over into that first stitch, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, and then again yarn over, insert into that chain row, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, and then yarn over, pull through 3. So we've reduced by another stitch. So basically each row we're going to be reducing by 1 stitch. So now I'm going to chain up 2, and I'm going to do my decrease again, because we want to be doing it at the start of the double rows and the end of the seed stitch or the V-stitch rows. So I'm going to do my decrease again into those next 2 stitches, and then I'm going to go ahead and do 1 double crochet into every stitch as normal, going all the way down. And at this point we will have reduced the rows by 3 stitches, and when we do our next row it will be reduced by 4 stitches. So once you get to the end of this row, you're going to chain up 2 as normal, do your V-stitch row as normal, and join in when you get to the end of the V-stitch row. Okay, so I'm just doing my last V-stitch, and you should have done 1 less V-stitch than you did the seed stitch in the previous row, or if you want to count from the last time you did a V-stitch, it would be 2 less than that. So each seed stitch and V-stitch row we're going to be reducing by 1 each time. So we did 12 V-stitches here, 11 seed stitches, 10 V-stitches, and then it'll be 9 seed stitches, and so on. So I've just done my last V-stitch so that now I have 10 in this row, but you will just do the number that you normally do for your row, but this time it'll be -2. So now into those last 2 stitches, I'm going to do another decrease with a double crochet. So I'm going to do my double crochet decrease into that last stitch and then the chain row. And now I'm going to chain up 2 and I'm going to do my decrease again. So you can continue going on doing a decrease at the start of every double crochet row and the end of every seed stitch or V-stitch row until you've done 23 rows, and then join back in. Then I'm going to go over how to do the decrease on the other side, but it's basically going to be the same. It'll just be the opposite in that you are doing the decreases at the end of the double crochet row and the start of the seed stitch or V-stitch row. If you want to see how to do that, join back in and I will show you how to do the decreases for the other side. But you're just going to keep going, doing a decrease in every row until you get to 23 rows. So once you have finished your 23 rows, it should be looking something a little bit like this. Depending on the size, it may be wider or narrower, but it's going to have this straight section at the bottom and coming up at the top in a V. So now what you're going to do is go ahead and do the exact same thing that you did for this panel up until row 12. So up until you get to the point where we start doing the decreases, both panels are going to be exactly the same. So go ahead and do the first 12 rows of the next panel the same as this one. And once you've done that, you should have the start of your other panel. So you can see here, they join at the point where we start the decreases. So now this one's going to be a little bit different because the double crochets, they look a bit different on the back than they do on the front. So we don't want to do the exact same thing that we did on this side. We're going to have to do the opposite and do the decreases on this side so that they line up. So it's going to be exactly the same in that we do 1 decrease in each row going all the way up. However, in this row, we did the decreases on the other end. So we did the decreases at the start of the double crochet rows, and this time we're going to be doing the decreases at the end of the double crochet rows and vice versa. So for this second panel, which is going to be the one that goes on the left side of your body, we are going to chain up 2 like normal. So I've just finished row 12, which is my V-stitch row. So I'm up to the double crochet row and I'm just going to do double crochets as normal, going all the way down to the end. And when we get to the end, we're going to do a decrease and I will show you how to do that. Okay, so now I'm up to the last 3 stitches, remembering that the chains count as a stitch, and I'm going to do my last double crochet. So now into the next 2 stitches, I'm going to do a decrease. So just like we did it for the other panel, we're going to go into 1 stitch, yarn over, pull through 2, then yarn over and go straight into that last stitch. So into the chain row, yarn over, pull through 2, and then yarn over, pull through 3. Then we're going to chain up 2. And so now normally for our seed stitch, we would be skipping this stitch anyway because that's our chain row and we're going into that next stitch along. But because we want to do a decrease, we're actually going to do a decrease double crochet into these first 2 stitches. So I'm going to do what we did in this double crochet row by doing a double crochet decrease into the first 2 stitches. So into that first stitch, and now we're going to yarn over and go straight into that second stitch. So basically we've stitched those first 2 stitches together, and we're going to use that as our one post for the seed stitch. So now we're going to do the seed as normal, but we're going to go around the decrease post, so the 2 double crochets that are joined together, and that will have decreased this row by 1 stitch as well. So now we can go ahead, go all the way down to the end, doing our seed stitches as normal, and you will just go back to doing your regular double crochets into every second stitch now, with the seed stitch going around it. So go ahead and continue till you get to the end. When you get to the end, you're going to chain up 2 like normal, turn around and start doing your double crochets. When you get to the end of your double crochet row, then you can join back in, and I'll go over the decrease for the double crochet row one more time, as well as show you how to do the decrease for the V-stitch row. So join back in if you want to see how to do that. Okay, so now we've got our last 3 stitches left in this row. We've got 1, 2, and then the chain stitch. So now I'm going to do my last double crochet, and into those last 2 stitches I'm going to do a decrease just like we did in the previous double crochet row. So we'll do 1 double crochet decrease, and now I'm going to chain up 2. So if you remember, for our normal V-stitch row, we're skipping this first stitch, and then we are skipping the next stitch and doing 2 double crochets into the 3rd stitch along. But this time we're going to do a decrease into the 3rd and the 4th stitch. So for that first part of the V is going to be a decrease, and then we're going to do the second part of the V into that 4th stitch. So it's just shuffling everything down 1. So I'm going to go into that 3rd stitch as normal and do half of my decrease for a double crochet, and then I'm going to yarn over and go straight into that next stitch, doing the rest of the decrease. So now you can see into the 3rd and 4th stitches of this row we've done a decrease, and now I'm going to do another double crochet into that 4th stitch to be the end of our normal V stitch. So now I'm going to skip that next stitch like normal and do 2 double crochets into every other stitch. So skipping every second stitch like normal, do your V stitches until you get to the end. Then we're going to finish off the row as normal, chain up 2 and do our next row with the double crochets, where you will come back to this end and do the decrease again, as well as the decreased seed, and then continue on until you get to row 23. Or if you're making a longer or shorter cardigan, whatever size you've done for the back and for your other panel. So go ahead until you get to row 23 and then join back in, and we'll start on the arms. Now we are going to get started on the arms. So I'm going to make a slip knot and do a chain up of 45 for an extra small. So if you're making this in an extra small, you'll chain up 45, a small is 47, a medium is 49, a large is 51, an extra large is 53, and 2XL is 55, and a 3XL is 57. If you want to make a size bigger or smaller than that, you can just take off 2 chains or add 2 chains to the numbers that I have given. So I'm going to chain up 45. So now I have my chain up of 45, and just like the front and back panels, we are going to skip those first 2 chains and count that as our first stitch, and then I'm going to do a double crochet into that 3rd chain from the hook. So now you're going to go ahead down the rest of the row, doing as many double crochets as you need to do till you've done 1 into every chain minus those first 2 chains. So in total I will have 44 stitches or do 43 double crochets. So go ahead and do as many as you need to do for your size, and then you're going to do exactly what we did for the front and back panel by doing the seed stitch row next, and then another row of double crochet. So basically you need to go until you get up to row 3, which will be double crochet, seed stitch, double crochet, and when you get to the end of your second double crochet row, which will be your 3rd row, then join back into the video and I'll show you what to do for the 4th row, because it is going to be a little bit different to what we did for the front and back panel, and then I will tell you the next steps. So now that you are at the end of row 3, just like with the other panels, you can check that you've done the right number of seed stitches by taking the number of stitches that you did in this first row. So remembering that that's how many chains you did -1. So I have 44 stitches. So you take off 2 from the 44, which will be 42, and then divide that in 2, and that will be 21. So I have 21 seed stitches, just if you want to check. So now for this 4th row, we would normally be doing the V stitch, but for the arms, we're going to be doing a slightly different stitch. If you like the look of the V stitch better, you can definitely just substitute the stitch that we're going to do with the V stitch. It's not going to make a difference to the pattern. You can just follow what you've done for the other panels if you would prefer to do the V stitch. What I'm going to do now is chain up 3. So this chain up of 3 is going to count as our first 2 stitches. So we're going to go into the 3rd stitch along, because we're skipping those first 2, because the 3 chains are going to count as 2 stitches. So now I'm going to do a double crochet into that 3rd stitch along. So just a normal double crochet, and then we're going to chain up 1, and I'm going to skip the next stitch and go into that next stitch along over here and do another double crochet. So basically you're going to be doing the combination of a double crochet and a chain up of 1 into every second stitch, because the chain up of 1 is counting as a stitch. So basically this is the stitch that counts as that chain, so we're skipping it and going into the next one, whoops, with a double crochet. So now you can just go down the rest of the row doing a double crochet and then a chain 1 into every second stitch along. So now I've almost made it to the end, and I've got 3 stitches left. We've got these 2 and then the chains, and I've just done my last chain up, so I'm going to skip that one and into the next. I'm going to do a normal double crochet, and then because we've run out of room to do another chain, I'm just going to go ahead and do another straight double crochet into that chain stitch. So it's going to have 2 at the end, but by the time you stitch it together, you won't really notice. It's just the way the numbers work out for this one, unfortunately. So now we're going to chain up 2 as normal and go ahead doing our 1 double crochet into every stitch. So the chains are here, so we're going into this one. So you're just going to go ahead and do 1 double crochet into every stitch, making sure that you do a double crochet into the chains from that previous row. So this is a stitch and this is also a stitch. So you need to make sure that you're going into the top of the double crochet as well as the chain. And now you're just going to go ahead until you get to row 12. So you're going to do 3 lots of these 4 stitch combinations. So we've got our doubles, our seeds, our doubles, and our gaps, and you're going to repeat that another 2 times until you get up to the end of row 12, which should be one of these rows, and then join back in and I'll show you what we're going to do next, which will be some decreases, but it's going to be a little bit different to what we did for the front panels because we're going to be decreasing on both sides. So join back in when you get to the end of row 12. I also forgot to mention when I was going over it for the first time, we did these gap stitches, but you want to make sure that you do a stitch into the double crochet, into that first chain and into the second chain, because remembering that that chain counts as a stitch. So we've got 1 stitch there and then the next stitch there. So you want to make sure that you do 2 double crochets into that stitch, but we can go over that when we get to it. But I'm mostly talking for like down here, you need to do 2 stitches there. All right, so I've done my 12 rows, and now it's going to be a little bit different to the front panels because we're actually going to do a decrease on both sides, but we're only going to do the decrease for the double crochet rows. So every second row, we're going to do a decrease at the start and a decrease at the end. This is still going to reduce the panel by the same amount that the front panel was reduced by, in that we'll be doing one less seed stitch in this next row, and then one less gap stitch in the row after, and one less, because we're only taking out 2 stitches every second row. But it's much easier to do the decreases on the double crochet row, so this should actually be easier. So I'm going to chain up 2, and then just like the front panel, we're going to go, so skipping this stitch because that's the chains, we've got 1 and 2, those are our first 2 stitches. So I'm going to do a decrease into those first 2 stitches. So doing half of my double crochet, and then I'm going to go straight into that next stitch and do the decrease, and then pull through 2. So now we've got our decrease of 1 there, and I'm just going to go along the rest of the row doing double crochets as normal until we get to the end, and then we're going to do another decrease. So I will join back in at the end of this row and show you what to do. Okay, so I've made it to the end of this row, and I've got 3 stitches left. So I've got the stitch at the top of the double crochets, then the first chain, which was our first stitch of the row, and then the second chain, which is going to count for that chain stitch. So I'm going to do my last double crochet into the top of the double crochet of the previous row, and now into those 2 chains I'm going to do a decrease. So insert into that first chain, yarn over, pull through 2, then yarn over and straight into that next chain, yarn over, pull through 2, and then yarn over, pull through 3. So now we have our second decrease. So I'm going to chain up 2, and then we've done that first stitch. So going into that next stitch, I'm going to do my post for the seed stitch. So now you're just going to go ahead for the rest of the row doing your seed stitches like normal, and when you get to the end you're going to have done 1 less seed stitch than what you did the last time you did seed stitches, or counting from this row. So basically every double crochet row from now on that you do, you're going to need to do the decrease at the start and the end, and that will reduce each row by 2 stitches. So I was doing 44 stitches. This row now, if we're counting the decreases as 1 stitch, I'm going to have 42 stitches. So you're just going to have reduced your number of stitches by 2. And then each double crochet row that you do, you're going to reduce by another 2, which will result in reducing the seed stitches by 1 and then the gap stitches by 1 until you have finished. So you're just going to go ahead and continue following that pattern, doing the double crochet decrease at the start and the end of every double crochet row until you have done 23 rows. And also doing the double crochet decreases into the seed stitch row is going to be a bit easier because all of the stitches are stitches rather than having chains as a stitch. So just do exactly what we did in this row on top of the seed stitch row and continue on reducing every row by 1 decrease at the start and 1 decrease at the end. Once you've finished your 23 rows, your arm should be looking something a little like this. You can see it gets narrower as it gets to the top. And now you're going to go ahead and do the exact same thing all over again. Both arms will be identical. And then this narrower section here is going to be the wrist, and this is going to be the upper arm section that connects to the jumper. Okay, so to stitch them together, you're going to need to grab your back piece and put that down first with the front side facing up. So you can face it whichever side you want, but you'll just want to check that the front and the back are going to be the same because the double crochets look a bit different on each side. So this is the way that I'm going to use it. So it's facing up, and now I'm going to grab my front panels and put them facing down. So this is the front here, the fronts are going to be together. So we've got our 2 panels there, and now what you're going to need to do is stitch along the top with the tails from the front or the back, just along this shoulder chunk portion. Once you've stitched those shoulder chunks together, you'll need to open it up. So I will stitch it together before I do this, but you'll open it up like this with the shoulder chunk stitched, and you'll grab your arm and you'll put the arm across here. So you want to find the middle point for the arm, make sure that the pattern on the arm, the stitches on the arm are facing down, so it's all going to be facing down right now. Find that middle point and stitch it along there. Then once you've done that, you can fold it back this way, and this will be folded in half. So it'll look like this, but this will be stitched together and this will be stitched together. And then you're going to stitch from here all the way up down to the end of the arm. You can stitch it together whichever way you want. You don't have to do it this way, but I just find that this uses the least amount of joins and things like that. So then you just stitch it up along here, and then we'll put on the trim. Getting started on the trim to go around the bottom of the cardigan, we're going to make a slip knot, and we're going to chain up 7. This is the same for all sizes. So now, skipping that first chain from the hook, we're going to go into the second chain from the hook with a slip stitch. So you'll need to insert, yarn over, pull through, and then pull through again. So I'll do that one more time. Insert, yarn over, pull through, and then pull through again. So now you just go down the rest of the row doing slip stitches. So you should have 6 slip stitches in total. And 6. Now that we're at the end, we're going to chain up 1, turn our work, and now we're going to do slip stitches again, but we're going to go into the back loop only. So these are the 2 loops here. This one closest to my body is the front loop, and the one furthest away is your back loop. So skipping that chain that we did to turn around, we're going to go into that back loop only and do a slip stitch. Now we're going to do 1 slip stitch into every back loop, going all the way back down, and you'll have 6 stitches in this row again. All of the rows for the trim are going to be 6 stitches. So we're just going to do rows and rows of 6 back loop slip stitches until your ribbing is wide enough to wrap all the way around both front panels and the back panel of your cardigan. So you're welcome to just make that as tight as you want it to be. If you wanted to pull your cardigan tighter, you can make it a bit tighter, and if you want it to be looser, you can make it looser. For me, making an extra small, I did 160 rows. For a small, you'll need to do 180 rows. A medium is 200, a large is 220, an XL is 240, 2XL is 260, and 3XL is 280. Once you've done as many rows as you need to do for your size, it should be looking something a little like this. And now what you're going to do is grab your cardigan that's all stitched together. So I've zoomed out now, but it still doesn't quite fit. But basically what you're going to do is pull a really long tail from this last row that you did, and you're going to use that to stitch the trim all the way along the bottom. So finding that first point, you're going to stitch it all the way along to the other side of the front panel. I'm going to be making my ribbing a little bit stretched out because I want it to bunch the bottom in just a touch. So make sure that when you're stitching it on, it's even. It definitely helps to put stitch markers in both of the ends and then stretch it out and put a couple of stitch markers along the middle, but you're just going to go along and stitch it just with a darning needle or doing slip stitches if you prefer. Alright, take 2. I just stitched all of this on inside out and had to do it again, and now I've just seen that I did the same thing to the arm. That is just how my day is going. I hope you're all having a better day. But anyway, we're going to get started on the ribbing to go around the neck. So we're going to start from the very bottom of the ribbing that goes around the bottom, all the way up the neck, around the neckline and back down to the other side. We're also going to put some buttonholes into this ribbing, but if you don't want buttons, if you just want it to be an open cardigan, you can just skip those steps. So I'm going to grab the end of my yarn, make a slip knot, and insert my hook. And I'm going to start with this panel, which when I'm wearing the cardigan, it would be the right panel, but right now it's on my left-hand side. So I'm going to be starting with this panel, and right now my cardigan is facing the right way out. So this is the inside. So we're going to start over here, and I'm going to insert into that very first chain from the ribbing. So I'll zoom in a bit. So we're going to insert into there and then do a slip stitch to join. So yarn over, pull through, and then pull through that loop that we made. And that's going to count as our first stitch. So now we're going to do a slip stitch into the next 5 stitches of the ribbing. So there will be a stitch in all 6 stitches of the ribbing. And now, once we get up to this section, we're going to be doing 2 slip stitches into every row. So we've got our double crochet row and our seed stitch row. We're going to do 2 slip stitches into the double crochet row, 2 slip stitches into the seed row, 2 slip stitches, 2 slip stitches, and so on and so forth. So there's no real obvious stitches at the end of these rows. So every second one is going to be chains and every other one is going to be a double crochet, but you'll just have to find a gap. And as long as you're doing 2 slip stitches into each row, it's going to even out, even if you don't do it in the exact same spot every time. So now you're just going to go ahead and do 2 slip stitches into the end of every row until you get all the way back to the start and do your 6 slip stitches into the ribbing on the other side. So up this side and up the next side is going to be exactly the same. The only thing that will be a little bit different is the top has stitches. So we're just going to be doing 1 slip stitch into every stitch. So at the top of every double crochet, just put in a slip stitch, and that's actually going to be the easiest part of this. So go ahead doing 2 slip stitches into every row for the fronts, and along the top at the back, you'll just do 1 slip stitch into every stitch. So once you get back down to the other end over here, join back in and I'll show you what to do for the next row. I'm just finishing up by doing my last stitch in this row. Now we're going to chain up 1 and turn, and now we're going to do 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch from that previous row. So this is going to be a bit easier than the last row because we don't have to worry about going into the end of the rows anymore because we've already got our stitches there. So you're just going to do 1 back loop slip stitch into every slip stitch that we did from that previous row. Go ahead and do this all the way until you get to the other end of the neck trim. Then I'll show you what to do for the next row because we are going to leave some holes for our buttons. But after that, we're just going to do more rows of back loop slip stitches until we finish up our neck trim. So it's going to be pretty simple. So once you get to the end of the row, join back in for the buttonholes. Okie dokie, so I am just doing my last couple of stitches. And I'm going to chain up 1, turn it back around. And now for the buttonholes, this is going to be the same no matter what the size is, assuming that you've made it the same length that I've made in this video. If you've made it longer or shorter, you may need to add or take away stitches, or you can also add or take away buttons. That's totally up to you. So now I'm going to do a back loop slip stitch into the first 4 stitches. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now we're going to chain up 2 to make our first buttonhole. So we're going to skip those next 2 stitches. So 1 and 2, and into the third, we're just going to do a back loop slip stitch again. So you can see there's a little hole now, and that's where our button is going to slide in. So now I've just done 1, and I'm going to do a back loop slip stitch into the next 7 stitches. So it'll be 8 in total. I'm counting that one. So 1, now we're doing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, And now we're going to chain up 2 again. 1, 2. Skipping those next 2 stitches, and into the third we're going to do 8 more back loop slip stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And now our last buttonhole, we're going to chain up 2 again and into that third stitch along. And now I'm just going to go all the way around doing the back loop slip stitches, 1 in every stitch of the previous row. And when you get to the end, you're just going to chain up 1 like we've done for the last 2 rows, turn around and come back. And we're going to do, after this row, we're going to do 2 more rows. So we'll have 5 rows in the neck ribbing in total. So this is currently the 3rd row. We're going to do 2 more after this row. If you'd like to see how to stitch into the chains, you can join back in for that section, but otherwise you can just go ahead until you've finished your 5 rows. Alright, so I am now back on my 4th row of the neckline ribbing, and I've got my gaps here where I've done the chains. So I'm just going to do a back loop slip stitch into this slip stitch. And now going into the chains, you're going to do exactly what you did for the back loop slip stitches, and we're just going to go into this loop here, which, because it's a chain, it's technically not a back loop, but it's going to look the same. So I'm just going to do a slip stitch into the back side of the chain and into the back side of the next chain, and then go ahead doing my regular back loop slip stitches until I get to the next lot of chains. So once you've finished this row, you're just going to turn around again and go all the way back, finishing up row 5. If you want your neck trim to be thicker, you can add more rows after row 5, but if you're going to add a lot more rows, I would suggest making the buttonholes maybe on the 4th or the 5th row instead of the 3rd row. Otherwise you'll have the buttons way on one side, but you can definitely add a couple more rows if you want to without moving the buttonhole. Okay, so getting started on the ribbing for the armholes, we're going to make a slip knot, and it's going to be almost exactly the same as the ribbing that we did to go around the bottom of the cardigan, but this time we're going to be doing 10 slip stitches instead of 6. So to do the 10 slip stitches, we're going to need to chain up 11. Okay, so now I'm going to skip that first stitch and go into the second chain from the hook, and we're going to do a back loop slip stitch. So now we'll just go all the way down the rest of the row doing back loop slip stitches, and you should have 10 back loop slip stitches in total. This will be the same no matter what the size, and this bit is probably one of the easier bits to adjust because you're just going to keep going until it's long enough to wrap around your wrist comfortably, and then you can attach it onto the sleeve of the top. I will let you know how many rows I did, but this is definitely one where you're going to want to measure it on yourself so that it's nice and comfortable. So once you get to the end, you're going to chain up 1, turn around and do back loop slip stitches. So exactly the same as the ribbing for around the bottom, but we're just doing it with 10 back loop slip stitches instead of 6. So now you're going to go ahead until you've done as many rows as you need to do for it to fit comfortably around your wrist. I wasn't sure what rows I should give as a guide for different sizes because I feel like everybody's wrists are so different. Like you could be a bigger size in your clothing and have a tiny wrist, or you could be a small size in clothing and have a thick wrist. So it just depends. If you want to make the same number of rows that I did, you are going to keep going until you've done 34 rows. Okay, so once you've done your 34 rows, it should be looking something a little like this. And this wraps pretty comfortably around my wrist. Pulling it a little bit tight, but you don't want it to be too tight. You don't want it to be itchy or uncomfortable. So now what I'm going to do is, using the tail or if it's still connected to the ball, that's totally fine too, because I'm going to do slip stitches to join rather than use a darning needle. But if you're running out of yarn, definitely just use a darning needle. It will use up less yarn, but I can't find my darning needle, so we're going to do slip stitches. So into that first stitch from the other row, so we're folding it in half, and we're going through that first stitch and then through the first stitch here, and I'm going to go into the back loop only, but it doesn't matter too much. And then we're just going to go through every stitch, making sure to go through both panels every time until you get to the end. Alright, and once you've done your last one, I'm just going to chain up one and cut the end, which I've already done, and pull through the tail. So there we go, that's your wrist cuff for the end of your jumper. And now you can just grab the wrist of your jumper. So this is currently the right way out, so you want to make sure that your jumper top is the right way out. Find the join on this, making sure that your wrist is the right way out as well. Match those together and then flip your wrist band over the entrance of your sleeve. So it's like this. And then you can just use a darning needle or slip stitches to join the two together. Once you've finished attaching all of the ribbing, you can then attach your buttons. I've got a couple of buttons here, and you just want to make sure that you line up the ribbing on both sides of the front panels and make sure that you're stitching them on so that they line up through the hole. And once you've done that, you can weave in all your ends, and then that's it, you've finished your cardigan. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you found this video useful. As always, if you have any questions, please leave them below in the comments and I will get back to you. If you make any of my projects, please tag me on Instagram at stephtashi_handmade.